have the pleasure to introduce our guest speaker of the evening, Mr. Ben Emlyn Jones.
I've got to keep going back.
Now, Ben was born in Aberystwyth, brought up in the Lampeter area before moving to Oxford, where up until about 5 years ago, I think it was, he had spent 22 well-respected years employed as a hospital porter at John Radcliffe Hospital, which is in Oxford. Ben became interested in UFOs and various other conspiracy theories in the late 1990s, and he started his website blog, which was Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, in 2006, and it's thousands of visitors every day. Now, he regularly attends and delivers talks and discussions all over Britain on a wide range of subjects, and he's visited us before on 2 previous occasions in our old venue, where he spoke on the subjects of energy, politics and UFOs, and the history of exopolitics. Now, his talk this evening is intriguingly entitled The Nottinghamshire Roswell. Now, he's braved the elements and travelled a good distance today to be with us this evening, so please give a warm souphone welcome to Ben Emlyn Jones.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be back. Now, it wasn't actually too bad in terms of weather. I mean, we had a bit of snow, a few snow flurries, but nothing deadly. That's coming later. I think we might be lucky. But it's great to be back, and it's great to be in this new venue. I wouldn't fancy being in that marquee this evening. I really wouldn't. It'd be a bit, it'd be a bit too much.
Just a bit, yeah.
Yeah. But this is me. Well, that's my website, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, now in its 11th year. And it is, basically covers the UFO subject, but also lots of other things, government cover-ups, ghosts, cryptozoology, paranormal, chemtrails, hidden history, archaeology, things like that. So it's an awful lot there. There's a news site which I update every day, videos, I've got a YouTube channel. I do my own radio shows as well, so I'm quite busy in that respect. Now, is there a clicker or something, or should I just, will you just,
yeah,
oh right, I'll just, all right. It's Mike, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mike.
Ben, you just tell me you're going to go through an hour and a quarter, and then we'll have Q&A after.
Yeah, okay. Is it all right with you guys if I do my whole speech now? It's about an hour and a quarter. Is that okay with everyone? And then I'll take your questions after the break. It's just a bit shorter this time, that's all. Okay, no worries. Okay, next one please, Mike. Well, today I'm going to talk about the Nottinghamshire Roswell. Now, you've heard the term Roswell before, many, many times, I'm sure, but never in association with Nottinghamshire. Now, Roswell, of course, is a place. It's a city, or it's a city or a town. It's called a city in New Mexico, USA. Now, in July of 1947, something very strange happened. An artifact of extraterrestrial origin came to grief on the Earth's surface and was secretly salvaged by the government. The government then put out a cover story and said it had been just a weather balloon. They've changed their tune several times over the last 70 years since then. Well, that's true. I mean, they've come up with all kinds of cock and bull stories. I mean, you name it, they thought of it. But they still deny that it was an extraterrestrial artifact. This is a stance that they continue to this day. And I'm glad to say that I actually organised an event called Roswell 70, which is the only event marking the 70th anniversary of the Roswell incident outside Roswell itself. I was quite surprised that no one else was doing it. I thought someone's going to do one in Britain, so I'll go to that one. I couldn't get over to Roswell. Then I realised no one was, so I thought, well, I'll have to do it then. It's the usual story. So it's 70 years ago, that's right. And Roswell, of course, is a name. It's the name of the city, but it's only a matter of time before the Oxford English Dictionary puts Roswell into its pages as a common noun to refer to this kind of event. It's an entire sector of ufology. It's an entire discipline of ufology, the crash retrieval, as it's sometimes called. And indeed, we in ufology already do that. You hear terms such as the Brazilian Roswell, the Welsh Roswell, the Russian Roswell. Roswell is essentially simply a word which is now being used for this particular type of UFO event. This is where a large amount of very decisive physical evidence turns up on the Earth's surface and it is then covered up. The government put a big cordon around it, They get rid of that evidence, then they put out a cover story and they say nothing happened here, move along. The Roswell incident of July 1947 is not the only one. In fact, it's not even the first. Next one, please. This is what you'll see. If you Google Roswell, you'll see an image like this, which shows a flying saucer and military around it, examining it, keeping people away, keeping onlookers, the kind of people like me, who are interested in these sort of things, away from it all. This is just one of many, many occasions where this kind of thing has happened. In fact, Roswell was not even the first one. There's distinct evidence to suggest that a similar event happened in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, USA in 1945, in Gateshead, England in 1940, and indeed if you want to find the beginnings to all this, there's one in the late 19th century, 1897, that happened in Aurora, Texas. These things don't only happen in the United States of America, that is the place where they tend to be reported the most. So I'm going to have to drink a lot of water because I've got dry lips at the moment for some reason. And the next slide, please. This is a book by Ryan Wood called Magic Eyes Only. You see Earth's Encounters with Extraterrestrial Technology. This is a book which documents the Roswell, the crash retrieval events through the course of the 20th century. And indeed, in this book, you'll find over 100 entries. Now that's an average of one per year. Of course, not all of them are going to be the real thing. Yeah, even if half of them are, even if a quarter of them are real, it means that the crash retrieval is a regular event that happens quite often. I mean, why it happens, I'm not sure, but do the alien spacecraft break down? Are they shot down by people on Earth? Perhaps one of the theories is that the aliens put these wreckages around deliberately for us to find, for whatever reason. Whatever the cause, there's no doubt at least some of these events are true, and which means the next one could be near where you are. Now, can I have the next one, please, sir? Here's a good example of what I think is very, very interesting evidence. This is a still from a video, it's actually from a film, a cine film, that was bought on the black market in Russia a few years ago, and it was actually put into a TV documentary called The Russian Roswell. And Roger Moore presented it, the guy who played James Bond. It was very, very good. Now, you see here a disc-shaped object embedded in the ground. There's some Red Army soldiers around it, and you also see an alien autopsy type scene later on in it. This has all been, the actual film stock and everything has been confirmed as real. Experts have looked at it and they've said the uniforms and the weapons and the equipment are all real. It's what you expect in the Soviet Union in the 1960s. So in other words, everything that's wrong with that alien autopsy thing that came out in 1995 is right with this. And I can't help wondering if that may explain the presence of the alien autopsy film, but that's another subject, a big one. But as you can see here, this is something that happens outside the United States of America. This happens in all countries, all over the world. Yet, what's strange about this is that the response from the government in the Soviet Union in the 1960s, at the height of the Cold War, was pretty much the same as what you found in the United States of America and its allies. There were several events like this in Russia, actually. So the Soviet Union was, at its height, was the largest nation on Earth, covered a sixth of the Earth's landmass. It probably received more than its fair share of crash retrievals. But you see exactly the same thing happening. You see the government will turn up, they'll put cordons around the area, they'll keep people away, they'll tell them it was a weather balloon or a helicopter crash or a test dummy or anything they can think of that will put people's interest away, it will draw people's interest away from this particular event. Now, during the Cold War, and nominally, the United States of America and the Soviet Union were at loggerheads. They were enemies in the Cold War. They were on opposite sides of this conflict. Yet, the same thing was done when this particular crash retrieval event happened. And what's more, you'll find the same thing happening in all other countries where crash retrievals take place. It is as if some global policy had been instituted for dealing with these things, which all sovereign states of the world obey. Very, very good question. Why and how are the first questions that come to mind. But anyway, that's a big subject, and as Ronnie Corbett would say, on with the joke. Next one, please. Now, the event I'm going to talk about this evening was reported in this magazine. How many of you read Nexus? Must be some of you. Yeah, it's a great magazine. It's just exactly the kind of magazine for people like us with our kinds of interests. It's based in Australia. It's been running since the 80s, and I'm a regular subscriber. I get it delivered. This is volume 4, number 6, issue 6, and it came out in, I think it was the January-February issue of 1997. And it referred to an event that happened 10 years earlier, in 1987. And there was an article in there authored by an Australian researcher called Harry Mason. And he refers to an event which he calls the Mansfield Incident. I'm going to call it the Nottinghamshire Roswell because I think it deserves it. I think that's a better name for it. But this was reported to him by a guy called John King, who you might know. He's someone I know, actually. He used to run a magazine called Skywatch. It was a first-generation internet magazine, e-zine, and it was all about UFOs. And he got his story from someone called Ansley, who has been confirmed as a real person. And what's more, I know where Ansley got his information from. And this is something I discovered exclusively when I started investigating this particular event. But it talks about something which happened on a cold autumnal night on the 12th of November 1987. It was a Thursday night. It was the early hours of the morning. This was about 1:30 in the morning, and people were either in bed or they were watching late night TV. Which there was a film on called The Battle of Britain, which is all about bombs being dropped and things like that, which is very ironic considering what happened next. Next slide, please. There we are. Just imagine that. You see, this is the kind of scene that would be before you, where this really strange event took place. It's an ordinary street in the English Midlands. And of course it's ordinary places where UFO events do happen. It's not always strange military bases and weird exotic desert locations. It's right on our doorstep, as you guys know here, because you've been researching them. So what happened was there was a large explosion, a large bang, huge explosion coming from the sky. People thought it was thunder at first, because that's simply what the first thing our memory latches onto. They thought it was either thunder or it was a low-flying aircraft. But it was much too loud. And what's more, there was a shock wave. There was a shock wave that did damage, considerable damage, to a large number of premises in a very, very wide-reaching area. An area several miles across was affected by this. Tiles fell off roofs, windows smashed. In one case, a wall fell down and a house was actually really, really badly damaged. Nobody was killed or injured as far as I know, which is pretty miraculous because this was there was a very, very powerful shockwave indeed. It also did damage to the local infrastructure. Electricity was off for a week, at least. I know because from talking to several people in the area. I used to have a partner who lived in this area, so when I used to go and see her, I had a base of operations, which is how I was in very, very good position to actually research this particular subject. No one was killed or injured as far as I know, but large amounts of damage to property was done. In fact, one of the witnesses, one of the most interesting witnesses is a man who runs a local insurance brokerage firm because he was inundated with claims. Another witness was a TV and video repairman. Now the reason he was inundated with requests for help was because along with the explosion there was an electromagnetic pulse. This is something which often happens during a nuclear explosion. Very, very powerful electromagnetic field is generated, very short-lived, very, very intense, which can do damage to electrical circuits. And a large number of televisions were broken, video cassette recorders were broken, they didn't have DVDs in those days. And this guy was basically rushed off his feet, with people turning up at the shop with their duff pieces of equipment. And it was caused by this electromagnetic pulse. Now, one of the things it could be, what if it was a nuclear explosion? It's unlikely because there was no heat effects, because a nuclear explosion does make a loud bang, you do get the electromagnetic pulse, but you also get a heat flash, which starts fires and burns and things like that. And that wasn't reported. There's no sign of any heat effect from this event. It's just a noise, shockwave, electromagnetic pulse. And next slide, please, Mike. Now, this is what people reported seeing, because people rushed out into the street to see what was going on. They looked up and they saw lights. They saw zigzagging lights crossing the sky, more than one. We're not sure exactly how many, reports vary. Large number of zigzagging lights go backwards and forwards all around the place. Some were brighter, some were darker, some of them were making strange noises. Some people reported hearing strange humming noises from them. And the next slide, please, Mike. Now, this is the basic area, what we're talking about. This is the area, the general area that was affected by the shockwave and electromagnetic pulse. The sound was heard over a much wider area because it was so loud. But this is the area basically where the worst kinds of effect was. This is a very, very large area. This is several dozen square miles. 11,000 people lived here in 1987. This is part of what's called the Nottingham conurbation, although that term wasn't used in those days. The Nottingham conurbation refers to the city of Nottingham, to the south here, and the various large towns, mostly to the north of the city, which the north of the city is a patchwork of woodland, arable farmland, pasture, and large towns, such as here we have Mansfield, Sutton in Ashfield, Kirkby in Ashfield, Normalton, Blytheth, Ravenshead, etc., etc. The area in the middle of this is called the Misk Hills. It's a beauty spot, and that is where a lot of the action happens in this particular case. Now, the lights were first seen in this area here to the north and the northeast. These lights travelled in a distinct direction, from northeast to southwest, beginning here in this area here, Mansfield, and to the east of that is a big green blob, that's Sherwood Forest of Robin Hood fame. These lights appeared over Sherwood Forest and Mansfield and travelled southwesterly across this district, this Ashfield district here. Now, this is important. This is where it gets interesting. Something came down, an object, a large object, probably 60 feet or so across, Harry Mason reckons, actually touched down on the earth twice. It landed, got back up into the air, and then landed again, and stayed landed. Harry Mason refers to the first incident as a bounce. He said it bounced, it hit the ground and bounced up into the air again. It landed at a place called Thieves Wood, which is just south of Mansfield, that green spot, just south of Mansfield. And that's where we're going to go next. So next slide, please. Now, what happened was in that area. Now, this is another interesting factor which ties in with some other UFO events, which I'm going to talk about later, including a very, very well-known case here in Wales. By 2:15 in the morning, there were helicopters overhead. Large military helicopters, including a Chinook, which is a transport aircraft with twin rotor blades. It's very, very easily recognisable. It's got twin rotor blades, one in tandem, one at the front, one at the back. And these were flying over this area, shining lights at the ground, the same way that police helicopters do nowadays, although those weren't used so much in 1987. And this went on for quite a long time. They were shining lights down at the ground as if looking for something. They were looking for something. This is very intriguing because one of the researchers who actually looked into this, he found out that these aircraft were deployed from RAF Cranwell and RAF Coningsby. And RAF Cranwell is now defunct, it's shut down. But these were not part of the normal fleet that were based at those airfields. And also the fact that they responded so quickly means that these forces were deployed forward into the area by the government deliberately before the explosion and the crash, which means that the government had some kind of foreknowledge. They didn't know exactly where this was going to happen, otherwise they could just station the troops underneath it and wait for it to happen. But they knew within a rough area where this was going to happen. They were accurate enough to be able to get some forces on the ground in that area, and also aircraft that could be used for searching in that area, ready to respond when the event happened, because they couldn't have responded as quickly otherwise. It was literally 45 minutes. They couldn't have responded as quickly if they hadn't had some kind of foreknowledge. So, could I have the next slide, please, Mike? So, the first thing my researcher friends actually tried to do was they wanted to find out whether this was reported in the papers, and this guy, I'm going to introduce you to him in a minute, but he decided to look into the newspaper archives, and not all of them are online. You have to actually go into the newspaper office and look for them on microfiche, and he did. He couldn't actually see any reference to this event anywhere in the papers. However, we know it turns out that it was reported, but for some reason it was missing from the archives. We know because the Ministry of Defence UFO desk made a record of it. Thanks to Nick Pope, God bless him. What would we do without Nick Pope? This is now coming out. This is an article on the online edition of the Nottingham Post, which is the principal local newspaper. And it goes, do aliens exist? And if so, have they visited Mansfield? This was from August 2010. Either way, newly released government reports make an interesting read. The National Archive is releasing thousands of pages of previously classified Ministry of Defence documents today relating to what may or may not be out there. These newly released files shed no new light on any of that. They do, however, reveal a high degree of interest in a 1987 incident. In the terms of Nottinghamshire revelations, the files highlight the persistent efforts and meticulous notes of another person or organisation in finding out what really happened south of Mansfield in the early hours of November the 12th, 1987. According to the letters sent to the MOD, the person learned of the event in the magazine UFO Reality. The letter writer explained that he or she had my doubts after reading the article, but ignoring the report would do no good. They then wrote to the editor of UFO Reality with a few background details on my past work in ufology, as Nick Pope, and expressing an interest in the Mansfield crash. Now, you might say that this person simply got the idea because they saw it in UFO Reality and they didn't relate to any real event that happened, but that's actually not the case. Because there are several people in the local area who remember it. The next slide, please. Now, this is Thieves Wood. This is the area where the bounce happened, the first touchdown of an object. Harry Mason reckons it was 60 feet across. It's hard to be certain, but we know it did leave some residual impressions on the landscape, which he estimates from that. And this is the area where it happened. This is the area where it happened, Thieves Wood. This is a closer image of Thieves Wood, which is just south of Mansfield. The road up the middle there is the A60. This is the main thoroughfare between Nottingham and Mansfield, the two largest towns in Nottinghamshire. Now, this is really interesting because I actually decided to look into this. I decided I'd take a little look around. And so I contacted someone, a friend of mine, a guy called Daniel Bostock, who actually lives in Kirkby and Ashfield, which is one of these towns in the Nottingham conurbation. And he told me he knew all about it. He knew about the Nottinghamshire Roswell. He remembers some of the effects. He remembers, because he was a teenager at the time, but he remembers having to get water from Bowser's because the water pipes were broken by the shockwave. He remembers doing that. He said that they brought big tanks of water on wheels, just like they did during the Great Drought of 1976, so that people could actually drink. And they brought these in, and that's how people had water for a while. The electricity was off as well. It was quite cold, and he said he had to wrap up very warm because of the cold that was happening at the time, and the heating was all off. So I got in touch with Daniel, and he and I took a little trip. We drove up to the top left-hand corner, because this is where he thought this is where it all happened. He said this is the place where it all happened, because there was a big fire there. This craft that came down caused a big fire. So what we did was we parked at the top there. Now there's a little road that sort of leads along to the west from the main road, the A60, and you see there's a patch of woodland there, which is a bit threadbare in places. So we walked along there, and we knocked on a few doors, and we just asking so there's a few houses there, just asking people whether they remembered anything or they'd been in the area at the time. Only one person answered, and they said they didn't remember anything of the type, even though they had been in that area at the time. So there was no luck there. But we walked a bit further along, and next slide, please, Mike. And we came across a patch of deforested land. There was some tree stumps, logs lying around, rotten logs, and this particular stump here is about 12 feet high, and it is scorched. It's blackened. It appears to be affected by heat. Now there's many things that could have caused that. That could have lit a forest fire and caused this kind of damage. I'm not saying that this particularly was caused by this UFO event, but it was interesting to us at the time. I made a little video at the time, which is not one of my best technically, but I did upload it and I just put it together just to show this evidence. We just walked up and we found this little patch here. I counted the rings on some of the stumps and they were like 67 years, 70 years, 90 years. They were quite old trees, which means they would have been there when this event happened in 1987. What's more, judging by the size of this stump, I couldn't count any rings on this, but judging by the size of it, it must have been there when, it must have been a living tree or must have been around when this particular event happened. So what happened was, after that, I uploaded the video to YouTube, and then I was contacted by a local researcher. I was contacted by a guy called Nigel. He just called himself Nigel in the comments box. He says, Ben, email me. You were looking in the wrong place. I know where the UFO came down. And so I went, right, so I emailed this guy, and I got talking to him, and a lot more happened from them. Next slide, please, Mike. This is the chap I talk about. It's Nigel Crowley, his name is. He's a local man, lives in Ravenshead, within that area we're just talking about, and he was very, very helpful to me. I had a long conversation with him, and what's more, I made a follow-up video featuring Nigel and Dan, where we actually take a trip into Thieves Woods. What Nigel believes, and what I believe, having looked at the evidence, is the correct location for where the object came down and bounced. And now Nigel is an intriguing kind of person. He's a bit like what I would call a keeper of folk history. Now we all know about history, about how some things in history are not true, like the Roswell incident was a weather balloon, and John F. Kennedy was shot by a lone nutcase, etc., etc. But the keepers of unofficial history, I think, are far more important than this. And I'll just give you a little brief interlude here, where I'm going to explain what I mean. Can I have the next slide, please, Mike? How many people here have seen the X-Files? Easy question. How many people here haven't seen the X-Files? Right. In an audience like this, you should start with the haven't seen. Yeah. Now, there's a very interesting episode. Next slide, please, Mike. There's a very interesting episode indeed. It's in. It's actually the first episode of the third season of the series. It's called The Blessing Way, and it features. It's got a Red Indian theme, and one of the characters is a guy called Albert Hosteen, and he's played by Floyd Red Crow Westerman, who's a famous Red Indian sage in the United States. He's a poet. I think he's a writer, and he actually stars in this episode of the X-Files. And there's a very, very disturbing scene where there's like a railway truck which is buried. You see it's buried here. And there's like skylights on the roof of this. And in one of the scenes, I think it's near the beginning of the episode, you see these skylights open and there's some men standing on the roof with hazmat suits on. Full NBC gear, gas masks and suits, gloves and things. And they throw these canisters in, and these canisters are incendiary bombs, and they explode and they burn, and the aliens run around burning. They scream in as they run around burning. And this voiceover comes on, and he says, "There's an ancient Indian saying that something lasts only as long as the last person who remembers it. My people have come to trust memory over history. Memory, like fire, is radiant and immutable, while history serves only those who seek to control it, those who would douse the flame of memory in order to put out the dangerous fire of truth. They are dangerous themselves, beware these men, for they are dangerous themselves and unwise. Their false history is written in the blood of those who might remember and of those who seek the truth." That was a very poignant and very revealing little scene in the X-Files. There's a lot of things like that in the X-Files. It's a really, really interesting series in that respect. Nigel Crowley, I think, is one of these people. I think he really is. He really is. Is it possible to go back 2 slides, Mike? All right. Another one? Back another one, sorry. And another. Now, keep your eyes on that bottom, that little clearing there in the bottom left. Okay, can we go forward a few slides now, Mike, just to where we were before, and then move on to the next one. That's it. That's great. Now, you see here, there's this little patch here, this bare patch. I'll come to that in a minute in detail. But first of all, Nigel told me exactly where the cordon was, because there was a whole area sealed off. There was a whole area of Thieves Wood. The whole western half of Thieves Wood was sealed off from public access for about a week. Now, Harry Mason mentions this in his article. Nigel said not only it was about a week, but that he knows exactly where it lay, because he was there at the time. So the A60, the main road between Nottingham and Mansfield, was sealed off. It was shut. It's for a week. Now, this caused a lot of traffic chaos, because this is the main artery between the two largest towns in Nottingham. A lot of the traffic, traffic was all diverted to the east through little small villages like Blidworth and Linby, and there was massive traffic chaos. Now, when I first brought this up at a speech I did in Nottingham itself, a guy stuck up his hand and he says, "I remember it, I was a lorry driver at the time. And I remember the snarl-ups and the tailbacks as people were trying to manoeuvre their way around this diversion through these little roads which were not meant for that amount of traffic, and it lasted a week." So this whole road was sealed off. This here is the A60, everything to the west of that is sealed off. There's the West Nottinghamshire College at the top, and the road there was sealed off. On the hypotenuse of the triangle, you see this road going down here, and then there's Kirkby and Ashfield on the southwest there. There's another road that goes along there to the east, and there's Ravenshead, which is there. There's a car park there where we actually met together when we went off on our expedition. Our second expedition at Thieves Wood. And that was basically, there were roadblocks everywhere, police and military, the army lorries coming in and out, nothing else came in and out, helicopters taking off and landing in the area, but nothing else. Now, Daniel reckons that he remembers a news story about a helicopter crashing in this area. I'm not sure if that's true, but if it was, then, well, helicopters do crash sometimes, and there was a couple of events in 2014, actually, when we did our expedition. There were 3 events where helicopters crashes. Normally, putting some ribbon around it and a bobby on the beat to stand over it is usually enough, and usually only for a few hours. This was a week. It seems like half the armed forces were there. It was a massive event. And it was basically, at the end of it all, they raised the call and they went away. There was nothing in the news, nothing mentioned in the news. And so, or at least if there was any news reports, they were fake stories, and they were later removed from the archives. So can I have the next slide, please, Mike? Now this is, we're going to take a closer look at this little glade. Now this is all Forestry Commission land. These trees are used for paper crop and things like that. They're coniferous trees, most of them. And they're quite old. As I said, I went up to the top here. I found large trees, and I counted the rings, 60, 70 or so years old. Now there's a couple of exceptions. There's a couple of bare spots here, including this one here. There's a bare spot there, and there's also a big long trail leading away from it as well. This bare square area here. Now, this is land which the Forestry Commission owns. It's not using. It's not using to grow trees on. Now, according to Nigel, this is where the UFO came down in 1987. It struck the ground, got back up into the air, but it left behind a complete mess. Not only did its impact actually destroy a lot of trees and damage the ground, but it also started a fire. I don't know whether this is because the UFO was very hot, it was radiating a lot of heat, as some of them do, or whether it was some effect of directed energy, say microwave radiation or something like that. But a huge forest fire broke out in that area, and Nigel pointed to some of the trees. I'll show you some trees. I couldn't get good enough photos, but he says there's fire damage on some of the trees that were around at the time. But fire brigades were called in from a long way off, as far away as Bingham, which is in the Rushcliffe district, to the east of Nottingham. And there must have been a major incident called. And they basically doused the fire. But then the army turned up and sent the fire brigade packing. Next slide, please, Mike. And now this is a photo I took when we went into that little glade. It's a square clearing, as you can see. Now, when that when that Google Earth image was taken, Nigel reckons it was about 2001. It's changed a bit since then. The land has recovered. There is now growth there. Small trees, bushes. As you can see here, there's some small juvenile silver birch. You can see the main canopy of trees behind them at the back. That green canopy is the rest of the trees in the other parts of the wood. As you can see, they're far more mature. These trees are growing back. Possibly in a few decades, the trees in the bare spot will have reached mature height and you wouldn't be able to tell that anything had happened. But basically, it's taken a long time. And Nigel said that this whole area, it's about 300 feet by 600, it's an oblong. He said that when the army moved in, they dug up 6 to 9 inches of topsoil, he reckons. They took all the topsoil away from that area and they replaced it with clay and sand. And he said for a long time there was nothing but a massive sand pit here. There's nothing here but sand and nothing was growing, just a few blades of grass. And now this was obviously this was a long time ago and now it's started to change. But obviously the question there is why did they do that? There are several reasons. It's possibly because the government were concerned that some kind of contaminant had been released from the object when it came down. Could be some form of bacteria or virus. You've all seen these horror films, haven't you, where something alien lands on Earth and it starts sort of leaching pathogens which cause horrible things happen to humans. I mean, that must have been a real concern for them, a genuine possibility. So that may be one reason why they. That's maybe one reason why they actually did that. Another simply could be to remove any residual physical evidence. Now, in the Roswell incident of 1947, something similar happened. The craft came down, it hit the ground, we believe, got back into the air, and then crashed at another location. But it left behind a debris field. This is what Mac Brazel and Jesse Marcel found on the Brazel Ranch. Now, when that happened, the government sealed off the area. They sent in forensic teams to clear away all the loose debris. And it's possible this is what the government wanted to do. They wanted to get rid of the topsoil so that any lingering evidence that this craft had appeared would be removed. And so that when the public was allowed back in there, they wouldn't be able to find anything if they went looking. And the public were allowed in after a week, and they found this area completely devoid of everything except a big pile of sand. Next slide, please, Mike. Now this is actually a part of this. This is the middle of it, the area. Now I went down there. I actually didn't take any proper soil samples, but I did examine the soil, and I compared it to the soil which was in other parts of this wood. And there's a distinct difference. The soil in that clearing is much more sandy. It's not sand. Obviously, over time the land recovers, the soil recovers, but it's much more sandy. There are a few molehills in that area, and you can see quite clearly the difference in colour between the molehills in this area and the molehills in other parts of the wood. Where they're sort of brown loam, it's more natural soil, whereas this is definitely sandy. This fence here it's just a crude wooden fence that's been built around the middle. There's like a furrow in the middle of this clearing. It's like the clearing slopes down slightly into a furrow, and it's very marshy down there. There's lots of mud. And Nigel says that this furrow was created by the impact of the object. So this is a furrow created by the impact of the UFO, 60-foot wide UFO, crashed, maybe moved, dragged itself along for a while and got back into the air. Next slide, please, Mike. So what happened to it next? It got back into the air, but did it fly away? No. It actually flew from here in Thieves Wood. You can see there's the clearing there. It flew on for 5 more miles here into the Misk Hills, possibly over the Holywell Golf Course, and then came to grief again a second time at Ansley Hall. This is this area in the far bottom there, in the far bottom. You see the far bottom left there. Have a closer look at that. Mike, next slide, please. The Warren. This is said to be where the craft landed. And when it landed here, it stayed there. It crashed and it just basically stayed there. Now this area here, you can see what we have here. There's Ansley Hall itself. There's Ansley Hall's grounds. And there's a slip road leading from this main road here to there. But that's junction 27 of the M1. The big motorway you see going across there is the M1 motorway. Now that motorway was not shut through this entire episode. So Nigel, Dan and I, we decided to take a little drive south from Junction 27 to see if we could actually see, if we could look over to our left and see anything of Ansley Hall. We couldn't. There are large trees in the area. We don't know whether these trees were actually there at the time. There are a lot more trees around now than there were in the 80s because of carbon offsetting laws and green belt laws and things like that. So it's possible these trees weren't there, but they must have. We don't know if those trees hadn't been there, whether it's actually possible to see Ansley Hall. If it was, then presumably the keepers of the secret have had to take extra precautions, putting up large screens or something like that. We don't know. It's not possible to know whether any drivers going past that area at the time actually noticed things like that. Now, the area where the object is alleged to have come to rest is called the Warren. Now, the Warren is actually not been marked on any maps. The name the Warren could be seen on Ordnance Survey maps before 1987. It refers to this patch of trees here, and there's also a pond there where there's fish. Where you can, it's actually a private fishing area. Now, if you go look at an Ordnance Survey map today, you won't see the name the Warren written on there. But that's what it was called. It was called the Warren. And Ansley Hall is over there. Ansley Hall is an old stately home. It was built. The first part of it was built in the 13th century, and it's all demolished now. But there's a newer part, and there's this like a semi-derelict second part, and there's also like some modern, or 19th century at least, servants and guest quarters, which are still occupied today by somebody, we're not sure who, but there's somebody still there, still looking after the place. The hall actually belongs to the Chayworth family for about 350 years, who were some local dignitaries. In fact, Lord Chayworth Muster was the man they called the Sheriff of Nottingham. I don't know if he was a bad guy or not, but from the story, he's from the Sheriff of Nottingham, but they lost it in a poker game or something, and they lost the house, and it just fell into ruins. But it's still maintained. I mean, the grounds, mostly farmland in the grounds, included here, this area here. Now, you notice here the discoloured patch. Well, this is what made me think about it, because this is when Nigel told me the craft had come to rest before I actually looked at this image. But you can see there's like a dark patch on the field, and there's several others scattered around. Now, I went, and using Google Earth, I went and looked at some other pictures, some other aerial images of fields in the area, and for 20 or 30 miles around, I couldn't find another effect like that on the ground. I could only see it here in the Warren. Now, the reason there's a dark patch there, where Nigel says the UFO came down, could have been caused by the influence of the UFO. It could have been caused by something to do with the property of the craft itself affecting the land. B, where there was the residue of where the military basically dug up the land again, just like they did in Thieves Wood. And possibly this is why it's discoloured, because there's a different kind of soil they put back. Something like that, but we don't know. Interestingly, there's a Cold War nuclear bunker just round about there, on the far side of that slip road. And you can see the entrance to it, but it goes down about 6 levels, and it's all sealed off. It's kind of like you see the entrance, you look inside, it's all wet and dingy. But that used to be a Cold War nuclear bunker. We're not sure whether it had any part to play in this particular operation to deal with this UFO. That's not certain. Now, the security around Ansley Hall is very tight indeed. There are some people who are supposedly gamekeepers who patrol that whole area 24/7, and they will apprehend anyone who tries to get into there, and they'll arrest them and hand them over to the police. The nearest you can actually get to the Warren on public land today is a little track that goes down this way, goes along there. That's called the Dog and Bear Lane. And we took a little walk down there. Next slide, please, Mike. This is a view of the second phase of Ansley Hall from Dog and Bear Lane. You can see here it's a semi-derelict building, and we were just opposite there. This is the location of where this, I believe, this object came down onto the Earth's surface. Next slide, please, Mike. Now, this here you see, you can't see the entire frame, but that thing at the top left is Nigel's hand. He's pointing towards the Warren. Those patches of trees at the back are actually the trees I showed you on the Google Earth images. But in front of that is this field here. This field is where this craft came down, I believe. You can't see the discoloration from ground level. It's only actually visible from the air, but that is where it is there. You see, that is the actual place where it came down. You can't get very close to it. You can get closer from the road on the other side, but there's a big barbed wire fence. You can't actually get in there. This here is just a patch of gravel in the foreground. Next slide, please, Mike. Now, we were walking along Dog and Bear Lane, and what should happen is, to our right as we walk up there, which is just to the left of the old building, the old Ansley Hall building that I showed you, there's this big, long, low structure, which is 19th century, and it's the servant and guest quarters from Ansley Hall. But this car pulled up, and there are people in there, because Nigel says there are people in there. This car pulled up here. You see, it's like we couldn't actually see what was written on the side of it. And you can't actually see on this image, but the window wound down, and I could distinctly tell that the people in the car were looking at us. They were staring at us. They pulled up outside this old building, a couple of 100 feet away, and they wheeled out, and they were watching us as we were walking down Dog and Bear Lane. Now, these are the gamekeepers, supposedly, to try and keep people away from the grouse, or are they trying to prevent illegal fishing in that pond, or are they guarding that area for another reason? Are these the equivalent of the camo dudes you get at Area 51? Maybe. I mean, what's interesting is Nigel tried to make some inquiries with the land management agency that looks after this particular area. Now, when I was in Birmingham when I did this speech, someone who actually knows someone who works for them told me that they're very concerned because the local council won't cover them for the damages and things like that. But when you look at the state of the buildings, you wonder why they care at all, because even the new building that's being occupied is actually in a pretty bad state. So I wonder if there's another reason. But Nigel actually phoned up the land management agency, and they literally put the phone down on him. They were very evasive indeed. They would not discuss it with him. He just asked about the 1987 incident, and they basically just no comment. Just put the phone down. What's going on there? This is a beauty spot in Nottinghamshire. It's the Misk Hills. Yes, it's private land. Okay, there's farms there, but and there's the Ansley Hall estate, which is now no one actually lives there apart from basically these people, this agency. No, I don't think anyone could possibly live in the buildings. They're in too bad a state. So we wonder what's going on there, because basically that area is being maintained with very high security, unusually high security, you'd think. Next slide, please. This is the cordon, which Nigel says was around the warren, around the Ansley Hall location. Now this was placed exactly the same time as the Thieves Wood cordon, because basically these two events happened together. The object came down, it bounced. It was literally just minutes later it came down at Ansley Hall. So the two sites were maintained. The two sites were managed concurrently or simultaneously by the government. This here, you see, the M1 motorway was working. It was open, but we assume here that everything to the eastern side of that motorway, from junction 27 southwards, was sealed off. Then you see this. We get here to the bottom of the cordon. This here is Hucknall. This is a large town just to the south of Nottingham. Sorry, just to the north of Nottingham. The city of Nottingham is just here. Then you go over here. There's Linby, a small village, and all this area here. And that there is the slip road. The slip road there was shut, according to Nigel, where that nuclear bunker was. So we just, again, it was about a week that this was the case, and then the cordon was lifted, and people were told to just go back to normal. Move along, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing to see here now. Next slide, please, Mike. This is a photograph I took of a tree in Thieves Wood, which is very, very. It's obviously was there at the time. You can tell by the size of it and by looking at other stumps and counting the rings. I could tell that was a tree that was there at the time. Now, according to Nigel, this has suffered damage as a result of this impact. This tree is a short distance away from where this object came down, and it suffered damage as a result of heat or radiation. We don't know. I mean, the only way to confirm this, Nigel said he pointed to some marks on the bark, and he said, look, that's sign. It was like these pink marks on the bark. I think you'd take an expert, a dendrologist, or whatever you call them, or a woodland expert, to actually say for sure whether this is actually damage caused by heat or by exposure to electromagnetic radiation. But this is actually being done. At the moment, I am now in the planning stages of doing further research into this. If anyone else wants to do it, the Thieves Wood area is open to the public. Anyone can go in and they can look around any time. Ansley Hall, as I said, is a completely and utterly a no-go zone. The Thieves Wood, you can go in there, check it out for yourself if you like, get in there before me. Next slide please, Mike. Now there are a number of similarities between the Nottinghamshire Roswell and one of the biggest and most spectacular UFO events on this side of the border, the Berwyn Mountains incident of January 1974. Has anyone here not heard of this? Nobody. Good. If you're a Welsh ufologist, you can't not have heard of this event. There's the similarities. A large explosion, a large noise and shock wave in the area. In this case, it was a very, very different kind of location. It was in the Berwyn Mountains, a remote area of northeast Wales, around the towns of Llandrillo, Llanderfel, and that sort of area is what used to be called Clwyd. I don't know what it's called now. But there was this loud explosion, loud bang, shock wave, and then strange objects being seen. There was one object, a very large spherical object was seen on the ground by a witness. And then you also have the presence of the armed forces and the emergency services. Again, you have a response that is so quick that the government must have had some foreknowledge. They must have been informed in some way that something was going to happen somewhere in that area. Not exactly, but they knew roughly where it was and at what time, so that they could get people on the scene within a short space of time. Again, the response time was less than an hour before they actually had this sorted out. And then, of course, we don't know of any object being retrieved. There's several rather dubious stories going around about this, that some object was crashed and retrieved. We don't know. There's nothing to be sure about that. We know that an object was on the ground at a certain point. That's what we know, and we're not sure what happened after that. But there was a lot of government attention on this particular area. A lot of poking around, a lot of nosing around. There's several researchers, a guy called Scott Felton, who's been looking into this in great detail. There's a video by Richard D. Hall of Rich Planet all about this. He's made an entire documentary about this. Very, very good indeed. There's been some disinformation as well, either knowingly or unknowingly. Several researchers have actually have disseminated some false information about this, and I have taken some task on that. I did a review of UFO Down by Andy Roberts. And I wasn't impressed by it, I must say. And Andy's never forgiven me for it. Andy Roberts and Dr. David Clark, they actually, in the 14 Times, they used their column to call me a nutter in their little column once, which was, I think that was I think that was Clark. That was Roberts getting his own back, I think. And the next slide, please, Mike. So, if decisive physical evidence was taken from Nottinghamshire on that night in 1987, where was it? Where did it end up? Well, this is probably where they would have taken it. So this is actually this is Porton Down, which is like a secret laboratory type area run by the military in Wiltshire. It's actually there's lots of research being done into the chemical weapons program when Britain had one, probably still does, but does it more secretly. Also the biological warfare program, various things to do with nuclear weapons. All this was done at Porton Down. There were several. There was several spy planes as well that were stationed there for a while too. And there's Boscombe Down, that's Boscombe Down nearby, which is an airfield, which is connected to Porton Down. So this is probably where it went. I mean, whether it's still there. Supposing there was like a saucer in the hangar, to quote Nick Pope. We don't know whether it was taken from Nottinghamshire and taken here, and then whether it was moved on somewhere else after that. Because Britain, like every other country, seems to obey this global policy of crash retrievals. And America, the United States of America, seems to be the place where a lot of this stuff ends up. There were several reports of, in fact there were 2 reports of other occasions of crash retrievals. How many of you know the Virginia incident? of Brazil, 1996. That's where basically there was a crash of a craft. There were aliens wandering the streets in the city. The fire brigade and emergency services took it away. It was handed over to the army. Then the Americans sent a plane. They sent a team in, and they took over. So it seems the Americans are very much in the lead in here. There was another incident in South Africa in 1989 where again the same thing happened. Next slide, please, Mike. Now, who's played Grand Theft Auto? I found it's funny enough. I was just googling, UFO crash in a city, and I got this. This is from the Grand Theft Auto. Now, I've not played this game, but I might actually play it now. It's Grand Theft Auto 5 because just to find out a bit more about this particular shot. This, as you see here, this big flying saucer, this alien spacecraft, has come down a busy crossroads in a large city. Now, this is an important point because the skeptics, bless them, you know what they always say, don't they? But how come these UFOs don't crash in built-up areas? How come it's always the Devil's Armpit, Nevada, or some other crazy place in the desert, or a remote mountain location, or some island in the middle of the Pacific? Why don't they ever crash in the middle of cities? It's because it's not true, isn't it? Because if they crash in the middle of cities, I believe you, because then there'd be evidence, but they don't, you see, so that means it can't be true. Well, several problems with that particular statement. Firstly, cities. Let's just see what we're looking at here. Okay, if you take into account Ryan Wood's book, Magic Eyes Only, it documents 100 crash retrievals in the course of the 20th century. Now, statistically, that's one per year, 100, okay? Statistically, where they're most likely to come down. Look at the Earth's surface, okay? We live in a built-up area. Swansea is a large urban area. It's tightly, large populations, large multi-level buildings, busy road networks, many, many hundreds of thousands of people in very, very close proximity to each other. Okay, it's a type 1 urban environment. But much of the rest of Britain is like that, and there's many, many other places like Swansea, even bigger places. But how much of the world is like that? We are seeing it from our perspective. A lot of these skeptics who say these sort of things are British. I mean, living on an island of 255,000 square miles where there's 67 million people crammed in together. Most of the world's not like that. Look at the population density chart of the Earth. Right? First of all, almost 3/4 of the world is covered by sea. So only just over a quarter of the actual surface of the Earth is land, is dry land where people can actually exist. Of that dry land, over half of it is almost uninhabited. It's too cold. It's either too cold, or it's too hot. It's too dry, too mountainous, etc., etc. So over half of that remaining quarter is almost entirely uninhabited. Now, of that the remaining eighth that's left, a lot of it is, you get like a few people per square mile. There's farmland and things like that, like you see in Nottingham, things like that. In terms of actual type 1 urban environments, like you see here, you're probably looking at well under 1% of the entire Earth's land surface altogether. Large cities there, a lot of people are crammed in together, but they're not very common when you take into account the entire size of the Earth. Now, the area around Nottingham, as I said before, it was the Nottingham conurbation. It's a patchwork. It's a patchwork of arable fields, forestry land, woods, large towns. And these crafts, they came down, that it was covered up. I think it was successfully covered up. You could say, well, what if the craft hadn't landed in Thieves-Wood? What if it had landed in Nottingham city centre? What then? Of course, it is only a matter of time, statistically, until something does come down like this in the middle of a city. They wouldn't be able to cover it up then, though, would they? Would they be able to cover up something like this? The obvious answer is no, there'd be too many witnesses. But let's think about it, okay? The people behind the truth embargo, as Stephen Bassett calls it, have enormous levels of resources. They have all the money they need, And they have the media. They control the media. They control the political figures as well. The politicians will say whatever they're told to say. And think again, in that situation, would they be able to cover it up? Or is this an emperor having no clothes situation? Because imagine like thousands of people crowd around this as soon as it comes down. You get thousands of people, my God, a UFO's just come down in the middle of the city. I'm going to go home and tell the family. They go home, switch on the TV, and what do they see? A news story about how a group of kids played a prank by inflating an oddly shaped bouncy castle at a crossroads. It was a flying saucer shaped bouncy castle at a crossroads. Sorry about that, but it was just a big joke on their part. It confused a lot of people for a while, but don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, there is not really a flying saucer crash in the middle of the city, don't worry. It's all been sorted out. It was just a bouncy castle. How many people would believe that if the TV told them that? Yeah, unfortunately a lot of people would. Even in contradiction to their own senses and own cognition, they would accept the cover story. The media broadcasts, televisions, newspapers, they're designed with the help of top-level psychologists. Organisations like the Tavistock Institute, the Rand Corporation, the Stanford Research Institution. All these organisations are groups of people who, by their own admission, say they want to control the world by controlling people's minds. And they consult for all the major media companies. And what's more, it has happened. This sort of, well, something similar to this, almost as good as this, has happened. I mentioned the Virginia incident in 1996. Virginia is a town. It's a large town in Brazil of 100,000 people. And a craft came down in that area, and what's more, extraterrestrial little brown aliens were seen wandering the street. At least 2 of them were seen wandering the street. Yet it was covered up. So therefore, I don't think it's inconceivable that something like the scenario described in Nottinghamshire in 1987 could happen and not remain secret. I think it could easily remain secret. I don't think there's any reason why it shouldn't. Next slide, please, Mike. So, what was it, though? I mean, what was it? Now, Harry Mason, the author of the article, which in Nexus, he believes it could have been some kind of secret weapon that went wrong. Some kind of weapons test was being done, and there was some accident. It may be some directed energy weapon that started the fire, caused the lights in the sky, caused the explosion. It's possible. It's possible. It can't be ruled out. But then it would have to be a very, very big blunder for this weapon to be tested somewhere over the English Midlands. I mean, usually these things are tested in more remote areas. It's possible, though. It is possible. Now, Harry Mason said, he also said that it might not have been a British weapon. It might have been Soviet. It might have been the Soviet Union initiating either some kind of attack or some kind of test on their Cold War enemy. I think that's unlikely. Next slide, please, Mike. Do you recognise this chap? It's Mikhail Gorbachev, yes. He's the 8th and final president of the Soviet Union. Now, when he came to power in a period where the Cold War there was a thawing in the Cold War anyway, but in 1985, when he took power, he instituted some policies called glasnost and perestroika, openness and restructuring. He wanted to transform the Soviet Union into a completely new kind of society in order to prevent it from collapsing, because he knew very well, he was a very shrewd man, he knew that the Soviet system as it was unsustainable. And so he set about changing the economy, bringing in more private enterprise and things like that, and also making the country less closed off to the outside world. He built bridges with other leaders in the capitalist West, the old Cold War enemy. He was very good friends with Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister. He went to her funeral in 2014. Made friends with Ronald Reagan, the US President, people like that. Now, he was looking to end the Cold War, basically. He and Reagan and their allies wanted to end the Cold War. Now, he couldn't save the Soviet Union. It did collapse in 1991. It was completely disbanded, and the new Russia came out of it. However, the idea that he would initiate some kind of attack against Britain in 1987 is completely nonsensical. It would go completely against his political strategy. If it happened in the 1950s or 1960s, I could believe it. Joseph Stalin, yeah, he would have done something like that. Not Gorbachev. It just doesn't fit in with the geopolitical landscape at that time. So I don't think it was a Soviet weapon at all. What does that leave? So Mike, next slide please. So we've got to think logically now. I love logic. Logic is great. Skeptics claim to be logical when in fact they very often, I've done an entire presentation on this, but I believe skeptics are very often not logical. In fact, they abandon logic in order to maintain their worldview. But let's look at it logically. If it wasn't some kind of weapon, it wasn't a weather balloon, it wasn't thunder, what was it? What does this leave? We have to consider other options. Next slide, please, Mike. Why shouldn't it be something extraterrestrial? I think it's probably that's the most likely scenario based on the evidence that's been presented to us. I think the most likely thing that happened was this really was an extraterrestrial object, an intelligently built extraterrestrial object that hit the Earth in 1987. There was some kind, whatever caused it, we don't know, but some object came down. Lots of objects were flying over in the sky. At least one of them came down, hit the ground, got back up into the air, came down again and stayed there, and it was salvaged. It was secured, located, and hidden. And again, the government are keeping the lid on it to this day. I'll hopefully have an update soon to tell you, because I am working on further research projects into this particular case. So hopefully there'll be some more results pretty soon. But next slide, please, Mike. If you love anything to do with UFOs and crash retrievals and exopolitics at Roswell, etc., Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, is a book I've written. It's a fictional story, but it's all about this kind of thing. And you can get a copy on there for £10. It's up on there. Next slide, please, Mike. And the sequel, since I came here last, I've actually published a sequel. It's also on this stall here for £10. Although if you buy both together, you can have them for £15. So this is the sequel, and I'm going to write a third one, so it's going to be a trilogy. So it's going to be a Roswell or Disclosure trilogy. This is Roswell Revealed, A World After Disclosure. It talks about this possibility. So do come pick one up if you're into this sort of subject. I've also got 3 copies of Evans Land, which is a Welsh-themed book, which is my first novel. That's only £5, even though it's a big thing like that. But well, thank you very much for listening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll take a break, and then I'll take your questions.
Yes. So pleased that Ben was able to come back to us for a 3rd visit. Can you believe that? All the way from Oxford. He came up on the coach today. It took him the best part of 8 hours. So, and especially with the day today, with the threat of the snow and everything like that. So we give him another clap for coming up.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a break. Don't disappear. Come back in for Q&A. Don't forget the box for contributions, because we've got to pay his travel expenses. And he's staying in the B&B tonight, so we're paying for that. Anybody here not here before? First visit? Oh, there we are. Come see me over there in a minute, and I'll give you some paperwork. All right? Okay, see you in a bit.
Any ley lines connected with the area?
Well, it's
Any ley lines connected with
funny,
it?
Gary, we were just talking about that.
Yeah.
I don't know, actually. I don't know, but I was just talking about it to Gary a minute ago, just before you said that. There's a guy from New Zealand called Bruce Cathy, who's an airline pilot, and he actually said that he actually was charting these UFO sightings and their links to ley lines, and he found out that there's a connection. They seem to be aware of these lines, and they seem to appear close to them. And people like in the West Country, in areas like Stonehenge and Avebury, these are all hotspots for UFOs, and of course for crop circles, which the West Country of England is the world heartland of crop circles as well. And so, yeah, I mean, it's possible. I don't know specifically for Nottingham. I'll ask Ellis Taylor, because I know he's spoken here. He's a guy, and he's working in Pembrokeshire right now, charting this dragon line, as he calls it, in that area. And he's put some videos up, very interesting.
I know Paul, sorry. I was going to say, I know Paul Sinclair's done a bit of work on ley lines in his Truth Booth books.
Yeah, that's right.
So, it's quite interesting.
So are there any press releases on this about, you know, the road closures and everything? Because people must be playing hell about it at the time.
Well, all I know is the lorry driver told me that he remembered it. It appears there's nothing in the newspaper archives, which means it either wasn't covered or material was removed.
Good one.
Emlyn?
Forgotten it, huh?
So it'll come back to you.
Hello?
I was going to ask you a couple of minutes ago. Forgot that.
It'll come back to you.
Sorry for that.
Anybody else? It's all right, come back to you, mate. Sir?
Have you managed to get any information out to people who were there? Like you were saying, the fire brigade were called, and have you put out a call to anyone who might have been serving at the time to come forward with possible information?
I sent links to my reports to several fire brigade people and forums and things like that. The actual official, if it's something official, that could be a different matter. I might have to, maybe the Freedom of Information Act will actually say whether or not there was a major incident, because for that level of response, say, you know, fire brigade coming from Bingham, which if you look on the map is to the east of Nottingham, there must have been a major incident called. So yeah, but it's worth doing. I'll see what I can do there.
Do you know what the police said about the road closures, do you know? Have they come up with any
as far as I know,
excuse?
nothing. As far as I know, I don't know what they said at the time. I know traffic was rerouted, but I said there was massive traffic jams around Blydydd. As far as I know, there was no official report about why that was.
Was there any... Oh, sorry.
So Emlyn, let's come back to you now, is it, Emlyn?
Go on.
Yeah, you see, it happened about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, 1:30, we believe the explosion was, yeah.
Presumably there weren't that many eyewitnesses, but if there was sort of a shock wave or some sort of tremor, some people could have gone outside the house to see what that was, and they might have seen something.
Well, they did. You see, there was people. The people who most of the people did rush out into the street and say, "What's going on?" They looked up and they saw lights in the sky, and they saw these zigzagging lights. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. There were, because of the explosion shockwave, there were actually more witnesses than you get otherwise.
Have you actively tried to find witnesses?
Yeah, we've been
that might
putting
not
up.
have come forward before.
We've been putting up posters on lampposts and things like that.
'Cause what we've found is quite effective is with Facebook now. There's a lot of little community groups who've got like a local hub, you know, where people talk about different things to do with the village or whatever.
The spotted
Hyper
network,
locals.
You
Yeah.
get quite a few good results.
Yeah. I'll ask
Big
about
groups,
it. Yeah.
you know, Facebook groups. They are. You could just put a post up on there. We found that
Yeah.
when we were researching the Penturk event, and quite a few people. All right, it creates a lot of trolls, you know, people taking fun, but you do get quite a few
Do
people
get
who will
leads.
remember the event.
I'll ask about that, because I mean, unfortunately I've split up with Sue, my partner in the area, so I won't be able to visit her. I don't have a base of operations there anymore, but I'm thinking of taking another trip up there and meeting up with Nigel and Dan, and because I know they've been doing a lot of work in my absence. They've been putting up posters on telegraph poles and things like that, asking for information. They knocked on a few more doors. I mean, the only person we spoke to in the area at that time didn't remember anything. But it's hard to know. I mean,
So 31 years ago.
it was a long time. Yeah. It's a problem. This is a commonly recurring curse of UFO research. The time between when something happens and when investigation begins. In the case of Roswell, it was 31 years. When Jesse met Stan and they did the big interview, and that led to the first Roswell book with Stanton Friedman. But this is a problem. I mean, in case of, I think it was Jim Mars, actually, the late great Jim Mars, who actually started researching the Aurora incident in the 70s. And by that time, this is an event that happened in 1897. By that time, the only people around were the people who'd been children at the time. Everyone else was dead. It's a shame.
Things get covered up, and then years later, then you get one person coming forward, and that can.
Yeah,
There's so many crash retrievals which have gone unknown. You know?
It can, yeah. And I mean, the problem then is which ones are real and which ones are just fake. And this is the big problem. I mean, the exception is Rendlesham Forest. Rendlesham Forest, luckily, thanks to the whistleblowers, Larry Warren and the other whistleblowers, by 1983 we all knew it had happened, and so research could begin, which is really great. Sir?
Slightly off topic, but wasn't Obama supposed to release some information on extraterrestrial life, although it probably maybe lies again, but was he supposed to release some form of information?
Well, it's all, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk about this. I mean, you're familiar with Stephen Bassett, the Disclosure Project, and Dr. Stephen Greer and Paradigm Research Group. These people are campaigning, they're lobby groups campaigning for willing disclosure from the government. And I think there was a lot of talk about Obama being the disclosure president, and that something would happen in his term. This didn't come to pass. Now the whole issue with willing disclosure is something I'm very divided over internally, because there's a part of me that thinks it's not possible. It's the implications of the fact that the fact they lied for so long, and the other things associated with free energy and anti-gravity and things like that, the technology, to actually not only admit that it's there and undo whatever policy that existed in place, which the whole world has been united, the whole world in the elite circles has been united behind. They've been absolutely unequivocal. They've been very, very consistent in their policy towards this subject for a century, more than a century. To undo that and then also admit that they lied about it when they could have actually come clean in the beginning, and then think how different the world would have been. My books, Roswell, Rising, Roswell Revealed, these books which actually discuss this issue. That's why I wrote those books, because I wanted to explore a fictional scenario in which things were different. And it'd be more different than we can imagine. I mean, for instance, free energy, anti-gravity, things like that. You're talking about an end to poverty, an end to environmental destruction, etc., etc. You know, they're going to have to have a lot of explaining to do. So maybe it's just going to. One moment, I'll be with you in a sec. But yeah, what maybe they're just digging their heels in, hoping for the best, because it's a hole they can't dig out of. It's the political structures of this world don't have the capacity to absorb a revelation of that magnitude. So,
I was just going to ask about the fires and any potential sort of like smoke in the smell, because when Turk happened, there was people reporting the smell of sulphur not long after the army came into the area, so just wondering if anything was reported on that, like strange smells. And
not to my knowledge, no. I mean, the Pentek incident is like really interesting, because like we've been talking about it in the break, and there's so many similarities. I've been talking to Kaz and other people and looking into it, and it's like you not only have the strange events, but you have like the media. It looks like a media cover-up.
Military cover-up for
well,
sure.
something that I found interesting on the Twitter when people were just talking about the explosion. All of a sudden, it was nothing, and then as soon as they writ it, within about 2 seconds, there was South Wales online or the police or something just writing them, just an exercise. You know, just like that.
It's the equivalent of just a weather balloon. It's backfilling is the entire case. You know, you can always get your disinformation in afterwards if you need to. You know, you don't have to put it in beforehand. If you know what you're doing, if you control the media, as I was explaining in my talk.
I think they were controlling the social media at the time.
Oh yeah, they do. Anybody else got anything burning inside them you want to get out? Sir.
You know, you said if a UFO crashed in the city, could they cover it up? Well, you know, with CCTV cameras now, and people got mobile phones with them, you've got to get someone who wants to take a selfie by it, isn't it? You know, I don't think there's no way you can cover it up these days. In the 80s maybe, but not now.
Yeah,
Well,
they'd just say it's CGI though, wouldn't they? They tell you.
Yeah, it's like,
Well, unfortunately, yeah, the core will then go out that it was Photoshop. You can't win. That's the problem. You can't win with photographic evidence. If you know, a lot of the skeptics will say, because a lot of UFO footage, unfortunately, is very poor quality. Someone with a very shaky hand because they're excited, pointing their mobile phone at the sky, and you see this. You just see the light going around. Look, can't you see it? My goodness me, it's like it's just above my head. Can you see that, everybody? Look at that, you know.
Makes you wonder if you get your phone straight away in the shop.
And of course then the skeptics saying, well, that could be anything, you know. And then of course something really, really good happens and they'll say, photoshopped, that could be faked. And unfortunately, in this day and age, when someone says that could be faked, they could be right. because anything could be fake these days. That's what it's a sad fact that photographic evidence doesn't carry the same weight it used to. It's a shame. But so in this scenario, there probably would be a lot of people who say it was fake. The people taking the shots was probably saying, no, it wasn't, honestly. But when they realise how incredulous they sound and how much is against them, they may well just give up. That's the problem, isn't it? Sir?
I've investigated a crash near Aberystwyth, it was, with Nicky Freed.
Vanilla.
Yeah, that was Mark Ollie looked into that. He was
82, was it?
yeah, he was a
December 82.
historian. It's funny because I actually come from that area. I may not sound like it, but I'm actually a taffy just like you. I am, believe it or not. And yeah, that's Mark Ollie did a documentary. You can get it on YouTube. I've got the DVD of it. It's like some kind of thing. It may well be some kind of aircraft. I'm not sure. Maybe some kind of experimental aircraft because there's a piece of it which he actually owns, which is clearly a part of some kind of aircraft, but it's like stealth material. It's like radar absorbent material, which means it may be in a trial of some kind of stuff.
Key rings.
Maybe.
It's made into key rings, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know Gary Rowe?
No.
He was one of the people that recovered some of this material,
Oh right.
and he turned it into 100 key rings, and he sent it to all different people
Ah, really?
to preserve them so they wouldn't get recovered or taken from him.
That's actually not a
And
bad idea.
We opened to go up, he lives in North Wales near Margaret Fry, so we're hoping to go up to see him soon. He said we can have one of them.
Oh, good. Yeah, great.
We'll bring it to the meeting and show you.
That's not a bad idea, actually, making key rings out and getting it distributed. Yeah. No, it's not.
Nose in the dark.
Oh right. Oh well, there you are. That's. Hello. Yeah. Carry on. Sorry.
The famous case at Nottinghamshire, is it Rustenburg, is it?
Oh, the one. Yeah, Mrs. Rostenberg. Mrs. I've got her first name. Was that Nottinghamshire? I know she's this lady who lived in a country house, and she was interviewed in a programme, in a very good interview with her on an old TV show. And you listen to what she's saying about the craft that landed. It came down right on the roof of her house, and these like Nordic aliens were inside it. And she looked up and she saw these like Nordic aliens. Yeah, and then I mean, the way she talks about it, it's just like. I know several people have looked at her interview, people who are good at analysing lies, detecting lies and things like that, and detecting when people are making things up. They say, no, she's telling the truth. And she's kept her story all her life. She kept the same story. There's other more recent interviews with her. I think she died a couple of years ago. But she never changed her story. Never, not once. That's an amazing case, that is. Gary?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about that, people seeing the craft zigzagging, you said? Did they suggest that it looked like it was struggling to fly, or was it just like the way it moved?
Somebody, according to Harry Mason, people reporting, they said it looked like an aircraft in trouble. And it was making noises. I mean, I don't know whether it was imitating the sound of like a whining sound you see in Hollywood movies when you get an aircraft that's about to crash. But they did mention, they said they thought something was in trouble, which is interesting, I think. I mean, whether that was just something that occurred to them or occurred to Harry Mason after.
I think that's maybe how they bring these things down, and then they get it in trouble first, and then they sort of like.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that. He was a bit of Roswell. There was a theory that the radar was affecting their navigation systems or something. Wasn't it?
Well, there's a lot of. Yeah, I mean, radar. I mean, these things. People often say, "Oh, they shoot them down." Well, there are reports of combat between UFOs and humans, but almost invariably the humans come out worse off. There are many situations of where, for instance, a UFO will disable an aircraft's computer system before it can launch its missiles. This happened to Parvez Jafari in Iran in 1976. It happened in 1957 to the chap called, what's his name? American chap who was in Britain. I forgot his name.
Mantell. Thomas Mantell.
No, that was earlier. That was a guy. Here's a good example of a guy who crashed his plane after he was chasing a UFO. Yeah, but basically, there were some reports. People say, well, a lot of these crashes happen when there's with this radar. New Mexico was the only place with this high-powered radar. Also, thunderstorms. Thunderstorms are often associated with crash retrievals. Now, the weather reports for that night in 1987: clear skies, no wind, It was not a thunderstorm. However, thunderstorms have been associated with Roswell. There was large thunderstorms around the time that the craft came down. Also in Virginia,
What date was it in 1987?
12th of November. But also in Virginia, there's thunderstorms. It may be that electrical activity or energy in the atmosphere also adversely affects these craft.
The big hurricane was in 1987, but it was in October.
Well, it's funny. Was it October? Was it
Yeah,
October?
the one of Michael Fish lost face off.
Yeah, that's right. But it was funny, wasn't it? It was literally just a month after that, with the Great Storm. Yeah, the Great Storm. That was a very strange thing that happened. Yeah, because he said, "Oh, some people say there's a hurricane coming. Don't worry, there's not." And it was.
Did you say something about a helicopter crashing in the woods or something?
There was Daniel Bostock. He said, "Oh, I heard a story about how I remember them saying a helicopter crash in the woods." Now that's not been confirmed. There's no way to confirm it after all these years. It's just his memory.
No, it's just when I was looking at the Sheffield one and the one we're doing now, there was like maybe a jet crashed in the Sheffield incident. A military helicopter was forced to make a landing in Penturk, so it's just more evidence that they're dealing with something.
Yeah. If that story could be confirmed, it'd be very interesting indeed.
Which one?
The helicopter, or the Penturk obviously, but the helicopter in 1987.
Oh, right.
Whether that could be confirmed as a news story that's released, because as far as we know, there's no official news stories released to explain this diversion of traffic, the closure of the A60. You need, I imagine people would ask lots of questions if that was going on. I mean, this guy I met who was a lorry driver told me it was baffling for him. He doesn't remember why it happened. He just remembers being stuck in a traffic jam for hours.
I mean, presumably the Forestry Commission must have had some sort of communication from the MOD.
But there must have been some kind of explanation, or something must have been said to them to explain why this.
Obviously, they wouldn't tell them, they do a UFO in them, would they?
Seems to be a lot of links with fell trees as well. They're always removing trees.
Yeah, you need some kind of cover story, and there's nothing that Nigel could find in the archives, in the papers. There's just this one from Nick Pope and the MOD. No, that's all we know. It seems to be based on a.
It'd be interesting to see what the Forestry Commission were told by the MOD.
Yeah, maybe we
excuse
get
they
anything
gave.
from the FOIA. Maybe we can do a FOIA on that. I don't know. It's worth trying.
I mean, because they went in there and removed all the soil and replaced it with sand.
Yeah.
Sounds like a big op.
It would have been, you need to bring a lot of sand in to cover that area. It's 300 feet by 600. They took 6 to 9 inches of topsoil, so you need many tons of sand, or clay, or whatever they used.
And where did they take the topsoil?
Exactly. They would have had to take that out as well. Got that out. So, yeah, very odd, very case. Hello.
The same thing happened in Berwyn, didn't it? You know, they took the topsoil off, or the big gouge in the forest.
Yeah, there's some kind of dip. Do you remember? Richard D. Hall discovered it. A great big depression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crashed into it,
If that could have been it, yeah. That's an interesting thing. Could have been that.
There was no burning in that, though, was it? Just a deep impression, you know.
Yeah, that could have been caused by that. It could have been caused by that particular that landing or the craft. We know it was when the craft came down in that area. It's been triangulated from 2 witnesses for where the craft actually landed. Pat Evans, the nurse, and another guy in a house nearby saw it. I've been to the road. I've been up the road, the pass through the Bedouins, which Pat Evans took, and you can actually stop and you can see across to Cadair Bedouin, where this craft was. Several people went up looking on Cadair Bronwen, which is the next mountain along, and there was some confusion over these 2 mountains, which I think has been essentially helped to muddy the waters.
Margaret Fry reckoned it was a place called Kevin Cork, which is a bit further south.
Right, that's Richard mentioned that because he interviews Margaret in his programme.
I know Scott Felton worked with her on this case.
Yes, she's.
She found some witnesses to say that he landed at Kevin Cork.
Yeah, I reckon I think she might mention that in her book. She's written a very, very good book.
She's not very good with place name, Welsh place pronunciation. She was on an interview with Gary Moore, I think, and I couldn't work out what she said, but I think it was Kevin Cork.
Yeah, she
So
may
look you on the
mispronounce
map,
the
yeah,
word.
it's Kevin Cork.
She's an English lady, she may mispronounce the word, but
Yeah.
but there is a place called Kevin Cock near there. But her book is good. Margaret Fry's book. I think she might have mentioned that in there. She talks about a landing of a craft which she witnessed herself in East London.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, in Bexley Heath, which is now part of. Well, it used to be part of Kent. It's now part of East London. And I've been to that location. I knocked on a few doors, but no one sort of knew anything about it. But this was in 1955, a long time ago. It was on a hot summer's day in 1955. But it came down in the middle of a crossroads in a residential area in a street, and a second one landed near a school nearby. Very odd.
Lots of witnesses to that, weren't there?
There must have been. There really must have been, because it was like this was a warm Sunday afternoon. Very, very odd. Hello, sir.
Has there been any sort of more instance where, I think I watched a documentary the other day where there's been implantations of some form of nanotechnology in people, whether they're sensors or they're like studying the human body. Has there been any instance locally of that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I see me. If you want to talk about it locally, yeah.
There are people who have strange objects in their body. I'm one of them. I've got one in my left arm. I don't know how it got there. I've got no memories of any experience that would lead me to believe something that happened to me. I got a scan from somebody, and I was quite surprised when I found out something was in there.
I was just going to say, how do you know it was in there?
Sorry?
I was just going to ask how do you know it was in there, but seeing as you've answered that.
I've got a mark on the
What I
arm as
wanted
well.
to ask was, is like the health effects of like implants or some kind of abduction scenario where people have had missing time. And
Yeah, these things
they
often
found
go
a signal
together.
inside them. Has there been any sort of health effects related to that? Like yourself? Have you suffered any sort of like...
I haven't, no. I've got a mark on my arm. I thought it happened, but I know people who have many, many more implants inside them. I know people who've got them in their heads, inside their heads, inside their hands, and they have... it does affect their health, it does affect their mental and physical health. But these are often associated with abduction experiences, and these objects, when they're removed, because they can be removed surgically, there's several strange things that are associated with that. Firstly, the objects don't look like any type of electronic device that we know. They seem to be made of metal. They're covered with some kind of ceramics, usually with a ceramic outer layer of some kind. It's not often able to identify. It can't be identified. And also, what happens is after the surgery, very often the object is replaced by whoever or whatever put it in there the first time. I have a friend in Oxford who had an implant removed from her nose. She had to go to Greece to have this done, have it done privately, because she couldn't go to her GP and say, look, there's something in my nose, space aliens put it there, could you refer me to X-ray? They'd refer her to the psychiatric clinic. So she had to go private. She went private and she spent £2,000 going to Greece and getting this thing removed. She had it X-rayed and it was gone. She knew it was gone. They did check that all of it had been removed. They gave it to her to look at. She didn't want to keep it, but they let her see it. Or they'd take it from her body. She went home 2 weeks later. She had another abduction experience. She went and got another X-ray. There was another one in there, in the same place. So whatever wanted the implant, they wanted the implant kept there. If humans meddle and surgeons meddle and take it out, they would just put another one in there.
Apparently they move as well, don't they? Once
Yeah.
They move around so you can't trace it.
Some of them do, yeah. They do move around inside your body. It's very strange. Anyone else got questions? Madam?
Anyone know what happened to the one road there?
Know what happened to what?
Your experience is want to know what happened there.
I would like to. I'm curious, but at the same time, it's something you can't enter into lightly, because I suppose I would need some form of hypnotic regression, and the prospect of doing that is quite alarming. It may do more harm than good. It wouldn't be something I want to do just to satisfy my curiosity, because it's not harming me. Whatever is in my arm, assuming it's still there, it's not affecting my life as far as I know. So I'm maintaining the situation as it is. I'm leaving it for the time being. But there may be a time in the future when I'd want to know, because I'd want to know how it got there and what happened to me, because I don't have any memory of any experience that would lead me to believe this had happened, and I don't have any idea how that could have happened. So it's a very, very strange thing. But I've got a mark on my arm. I just mentioned I had this mark on my arm. It looks like a face. You know, you can see it from there. Circular mark with 2 spots in it. And someone said, oh, go and get yourself scanned just to be sure. I said, all right. So I went to someone I know who does these scans. They have an electromagnetic field detector, a radio frequency detector, and a metal detector. They did all 3. And they found there was a radio frequency pulse coming from there, also an electromagnetic field. There's nothing on the metal detector.
When
Very odd.
did that appear in your own?
It must have been sometime around 2013, I think. That's when I first noticed it. It was around then.
What do you think of hypnotic regression as a means to recover lost memories?
It can be very effective. It can be very effective. I know that some I've been following the Facebook group. I know a member of this particular organisation has been involved, has been undergoing that kind of thing. If it's done properly, I mean, there's some people you have to go with someone who's trustworthy and has a good reputation. Names that come to mind are Mary Rodwell, Michael Coggins. I think these are people you can trust to do a good job. Michael Collins is retired now. Coggins is retired.
Have there been any sort of like negative experiences then?
I know people who've found it quite unpleasant to be reminded of these things. I mean, Whitley Strieber, for example, he found out what happened to him with his hypnotic regression, but it opened a Pandora's box in his life. He knew the truth, but the truth wasn't very pleasant.
This is like Betty and Barney Hill there, and they were put
Now, Betty and Barney Hill are often called the first abductees. They're not the first. They're the first to go public. They're the first that were widely publicised. And I actually went to Holmfirth, the Holmfirth UFO Truth Magazine conference. Kathleen Marden was there, who is the niece of Betty Hill, and was very close both to Betty and to Barney. She was very close to them both, and she went along this. When this broke out in her family, she was very much involved. She's written a book called Captured. She's co-author with Stanton Friedman, all about that. But Betty and Barney had this. They had their experience. They knew something had happened to them. They knew something had got wrong. They did need hypnotic regression to recover some of the memories. But it was traumatic for them. It changed their life forever. But they never changed their story. Barney died in 1969. Betty lived, I think she died in the late 90s. She did an interview just before she died. She said exactly the same thing. She never changed her story. Never once. When she was an old lady, she was still saying the same thing. Really quite remarkable.
You're on about the 70-year Roswell anniversary. I'm still very new to all this UFO stuff, but has anyone ever planned in Britain to do like a disclosure project like they did in America all those years ago? Because it just seems more than enough here to...
Yeah, well, a lot of the disclosure, it seems to be centred on the United States, like everything to do with UFOs. But Stephen Bassett has actually been over in Britain for a few months, and he's coming back. And he's trying to work with the British government now. He's been very, very active in Russia.
Probably see David Clark and Nick Pope there.
You just imagine their faces, can't you? It'd be worth it. I just want to see their faces. But he's been in Russia. He's done a big interview on a major TV channel in Russia. He's trying to get an audience with President Putin. He believes that Russia's probably...
I think they are.
I agree with him.
I have noticed Russia has a much more open and public attitude, even Argentina, but that's a bit worth.
Britain's controlled by the Americans. He's not going to get anyway.
Russia's actually become, in terms of its relationship to the globalists, it's been very, very recalcitrant and very, very disobedient. It didn't accept the IMF loans and things like that. Putin is actually he's not doing what he's told by his lords and masters. So
cover story is that for real? Like, because some are suggesting Trump is like that. He's starting to move away from all this kind of ideas.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say with Trump. I'm not sure, but Putin, I actually think he's if there's one head of state who actually will come clean about all this, because he must have this knowledge, it's him. And Steve agrees. Steve's working hard in Russia now. He's working in Britain as well a lot. So hopefully you get him to speak here. I mean, he's in this country quite a lot. He'd be a great guest to speak here. He really would. He's going to be on my show actually, not this week, next week. He's a good guy. I like Steve. I think Stephen Bassett I prefer to Greer. I think Stephen Bassett I hold in much higher esteem. I think he's a much better hope than Greer.
He makes too many promises and never delivers.
Yeah, and so he's a bit of a rock star as well. Isn't he? I went to an event with Stephen Greer in London, and it was very expensive event, even for central London. And you get the chance to talk to him. He's been mobbed by his groupies, you know, and I couldn't get near him.
He literally charges like $3,000 for these ambassador of the world kind of
Oh, yeah.
things or something.
It's just
That's
like
a
you
story.
get mobbed by groupies in conferences, don't you?
Oh, now and again, not like he does.
I'm surprised Kerry Cassidy and Bill Ryan were there arguing with it.
Oh, that was hilarious.
Did you see that on YouTube?
Yes, that was absolutely hilarious because I
They were
mean,
really going at it, weren't they?
two of the biggest egos in ufology, the clash of the titans. It was wonderful, and I think the thing is, Kerry was right actually. I think Kerry was right in what she said to him, and he just didn't like it because he just doesn't like being contradicted, Greer. But it was a very, very good debate. And it was really, really great, very entertaining. And but Greer does have this. He always talks about the aliens. He says the aliens are benevolent and they're wonderful. They're all lovely. Well, it's only we humans who are nasty. But in fact, aliens. Well, there's more than one of them. There's a taxonomy of species that have been identified of all kinds, and they seem to exhibit quite a wide variety of behaviour. And they seem to have a lot of very, very different diverging agendas. And they're not all nice. Most of them actually seem to be quite indifferent.
And she was trying to tell him this,
Yeah.
he wouldn't have it, but he thinks that they're all benevolent and that's it.
Yeah, he was like, well, Kerry wrote a blog article, it was actually pretty good. Quite a good criticism of Greer. And Greer didn't like it. He didn't like being criticised. And so he called it a poisonous streed or something like that. And they had this big debate. It's really great. But they do, I mean, Greer's wrong. I mean, they're not... I mean, the majority of the extraterrestrials, from what I gather, seem to be... I'd say we're under sort of... we seem to be under some neutral observance, I'd say, by these creatures, whatever they are. And there are some that are very friendly and very loving, and there's a minority, luckily, who seem to be quite unpleasant, but luckily they are a minority.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about another person that is pretty big in the circuit, is Richard Dolan. And he's very... I'm familiar with Greer, but I was just going to say, what are your thoughts on him, if you've ever spoken to him? Or?
He's an excellent writer, an excellent historian on this subject. Richard Dolan, I have met him. He's spoken at Leeds Exopolitics a couple of times. I emceed a conference where he was speaking. And he's written some really good books, which are great historical narratives of the UFO phenomenon. It was something, he was basically quite a conventional historian for a while. He trained at Oxford. And he did a module on UFOs, just almost as an aside, as part of one of his studies, and it changed his life. And he made a career out of it, and he's been doing it ever since. And he's very interesting to listen to, very interesting to read his books, and I do recommend it. He's very, very informative. I really do think that he is. Anyone else like to say anything?
Well, just going back to the hypnosis, do you think it's possible to implant memories inadvertently into somebody's mind?
Yes.
So they're actually experiencing fake memories?
Yes, it is certainly possible to do that.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of psychological warfare is about doing that very thing.
Yeah.
And it could be, you don't need to get someone on the couch and fill them with drugs. You could just control the media, as I was explaining in my talk. If you have control of the media and you know what to say in the media to hit the right notes, you can make people believe things they wouldn't otherwise believe.
Well, I think that's why I was attacking NLP, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was talking about neuro-linguistic programming for that very reason.
In terms of hypnotic regression, done openly, and the type done by Mary Rodwell, she's actually she is very, very careful not to lead on witnesses. She doesn't make suggestions and say, what do you think? She actually waits for them to provide the information. I mean, her book is really good. She's written 2 books now. There's one called Contact and one called The New Human. And she goes into the various cases she's been studying. And I've interviewed her a couple of times, and she's very, very... she sounds to be very professional. She has a nursing background. She's very scientific in her attitude. And I think if I ever had to have some kind of hypnotic regression, it'd be with her. I want it to be with her. Definitely.
I've used hypnosis for maybe 50 years, and in the clubs as well, and hypnotherapy, and she can do miracles.
Yeah.
And then I showed you 25 years ago in this class.
You've done that, you say?
Yeah.
You were a stage
My
hypnotist?
job for the last 25 years, I've been travelling as a mind-reader hypnotist. You know, and,
All right. And so you can like get people on stage and get them to
Yeah,
sing like Elvis and...
Well, I use Emlyn Jones then. But, no, as I said, my famous one was the flying saucers. I would say at the end of the show, I would tell him, like, give him a number. It might be 9 on stage. I say, you were number 1, right up to 9. Whenever I go, 1, you would see flying saucers.
Oh.
And they come up to me, and I did one. I got videos of it because somebody filmed them. They gave me a video. And one of them it's in actually Aberafan in the club. And he came up to me. He wasn't out on stage. He went under it in the crowd. And one of the boys said, look, he's gone under there. So I left him there for a bit, and then I called him out. And I just went, and he ran up to me, quick, police. I had to make a noise of the police car. I go, to make it think the police are coming.
All right.
That's how powerful it is. That's how powerful.
You can implant people's
Yeah.
things in people's mind, yeah.
Well, I started at 69, after hypnosis. For sport, then it was karate and athletics. And then I went into the stage in 70. And then 89, my job finished. It closed down where I was. And I went full-time entertainer, travelling Tenerife, London, RAF base. But the RAF base I went to is a famous case in 57 of the American who had to so shot it down.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the name I was trying to think of.
Manston, RAF Manston.
Yes, that's right. He was in Essex. I heard. He was. He actually took off, and he was told to. He was ordered to fly because they picked up objects on radar.
He locked on to the craft, and he was going to shoot it down.
Yeah, he was going to shoot down. Big radar return on it.
That was near Rendlesham, wasn't it?
Yeah.
57.
It was. It was near Rendlesham Forest, and again his plane, his firing control system failed.
Yeah.
And I'll think of his name in a minute. I really will. But
He'll come back. He said he's kind of he's in Mexico. He's American, but Mexican name.
yeah. But he was one of the witnesses at the 2001 press conference, and he basically stood on stage and he was almost in tears because he kept this secret for so long. Milton Torres. I think it'll come to me eventually.
Yeah.
Milton Torres, yeah. And there's another incident in Iran in 1976, which almost exactly the same thing happened. The Tehran invasion. Yeah. So this aircraft was sent up to intercept a craft that's sitting over this close to the city of Tehran, the capital. And he saw it. He actually got visual on this one. Multicoloured lights, disc-shaped object. He was told to shoot it, open fire. Fire control system died, and he couldn't shoot his missiles.
Well, the amazing question, J. Allen Hynek, I went to see him in 79 in London, the first UFO Congress in Mount Royal Hotel. I was there.
Oh, right.
500 people, 2 days. I got up and I said, Dr. Hynek, is it true what the amazing question was on your show? And he made you, I know it was because I've been friendly with him for the last 38 years. He came to Wales in 1981 and in the Double Diamond Club, Caerphilly. And I was talking, Hynek said, yeah, it is true. At the drop of a hand, he made people see flying saucers. I knew that because I did it myself, you know. But no, he talked to Hynek and I stopped him and I got nice shots in the out. So.
No, nice one. Nice one. Is anyone else?
I'm just going to say one more. I was brought Mary Wardwell. What is do you reckon there's anything to this whole thing about the new children here? Because it seems a little fairy tale-ish.
It sounds a bit new age, doesn't it? However, you know, the evidence she's produced is actually quite real. It's there are children who seem to be having very, very positive interactions with aliens who say they want basically to enlighten us on a spiritual, intellectual level, and I mean, if I just heard that in some kind of commune in some forest with guys with tie-dye shirts, I'd just laugh. But Mary's not like that. Mary's a scientific person.
It's just, I mean, one of the ones I like for hypnosis is Dolores Cannon. I mean, I like her.
Yeah.
Because I reckon she's shown a lot of things over the years.
You read The Convoluted Universe?
I haven't read that one, only the Three Waves one.
Right, that's The Convoluted Universe. Book 2 especially is very good.
It's just, you know, it seems Mary Wardwell, I get the idea she's kind of maybe filling in the gaps with her work. I
Very
guess.
similar, yeah. I mean, Dolores has now passed away, but her books, because she would actually she wouldn't go into trance as a trance medium. She would actually hypnotically regress people, and they would report past lives as aliens. And it's one of the most astonishing things. It really is.
Right. Last question, anybody? One more?
One more, anybody?
You know, in South Africa,
There was one.
South Africa.
there's a school called Ariel, I believe it's called.
The aerial school, it's Zimbabwe, yeah.
Zimbabwe. What's your opinion on that? A lot of kids saw you at home.
They did.
And apparently the alien was talking telepathic to them, saying that, protect the earth and look after it. What's your opinion on that?
It's an extraordinary case. Dr. John Mack,
Yeah.
sadly departed Dr. John Mack, did a brilliant research project on that. These kids are now adults, they're in their 20s and 30s. They've been tracked down by someone called Randall Nickerson, and he's making a new documentary with interviews with these people. And you know what? They stand by their story.
Stick into it, nice.
Yeah, these are things that happened when they were little kids. They were like age 5 to 12.
What was it? Sorry, Ben. I'm just gonna...
The aerial school sightings in Zimbabwe, 1994. These little kids, they're adults, and they stand by their story. And so, if it's some kind of prank that they made up, why do they stand by? I made up pranks when I was a little kid. I don't pretend they're real now. No, they say, no, the kids say it was real. They're adults now, and they say it was real. It's an incredible story. It really is incredible.
Very much the same as the one in Wales as well. Isn't it?
Oh yes, that's right.
Yeah.
The Welsh Triangle, what's it?
Broadhaven.
Broadhaven, yes, in Pembrokeshire. There's a lot of similarities to that case. There's another one in Australia, actually, in 1966, which also has a lot of very strange similarities. The school, the crafts coming down, things like that. Very, very... It's like these things do repeat themselves, like I've said tonight. It's almost like different cases come out with the same features. It's very, very odd. Okay, well,
Right.
Okay.
thank you very
Thank
much,
you, Ben.
everybody. Thank
Mr. Ben
you.
Emlyn Jones.